The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Caleb Stroud rode into Larkspur Bend, and the first thing he saw through the grey curtain of it was 9 children standing in a single row on the courthouse steps, soaked to the bone, holding hands so tightly their knuckles had gone white. He was 39 years old, a cattleman with a quiet face and a slow way of speaking, and he had buried enough of his own grief over the years to recognize the look of it in the faces of strangers. What he did not yet know, as his horse stamped in the mud and the cold ran down the back of his collar, was that before the sun set on that miserable afternoon, he would say 5 words that would change every one of those lives forever. He almost rode past them. That was the truth he would admit later, by the fire, when the little ones asked him to tell the story again. A man with 300 head of cattle and a half-finished barn has no business stopping in a strange town in the rain. But the smallest of the children, a girl who could not have been more than 2, lost her grip on her sister's hand and sat down hard in a puddle. And instead of crying, she simply looked up at the sky with such patient, weary acceptance that Caleb Stroud felt something turn over in his chest. He had seen that look before. He had worn it himself. So he stopped. "You children waiting on somebody?" he called down from the saddle. The oldest among them stepped forward. He was a boy of about 12, thin as a fence rail, with his chin lifted in the particular way of a child who has decided he must be a man before he is ready. "We're waiting on the county agent, sir," the boy said. "Mr. Pell, he's deciding where we go." "Where you go," Caleb repeated. "They're splitting us up," the boy said, and though his voice stayed level, his eyes did not. "On account of nobody wants 9 of us together. Miss Esther passed on Tuesday. In her sleep, real peaceful, the doctor said. She didn't suffer none." He swallowed. "But she was the only one who'd take us all, and now she's gone, and Mr. Pell says 9 is too many for any one place." Caleb sat very still in the rain. Behind the boy, the others watched him with 8 pairs of eyes, and he understood without being told that they had learned not to hope at strangers. That was the thing that undid him, in the end. Not the cold, not the puddle, not even the boy's brave little speech. It was that not one of those children looked at him like he might save them. They had stopped expecting to be saved. He swung down from the horse. Her name had been Esther Vane, he would learn, a widow of 63 who had spent the last 11 years of her life taking in the children that the territory had no use for. The infant left on the church step, the 2 brothers whose father had walked west and never written. The little girl found sleeping in the back of an empty wagon at the edge of a cattle drive, with no name anyone could discover, so Esther had given her one. One by one they had come to her small house at the end of Larkspur Bend, and one by one she had fed them and taught them their letters, and sat up with them through their fevers, and never once said the word orphan in her own kitchen. She had called them, simply, the children, as though they belonged to someone, as though they belonged to her. And then on a Tuesday morning she had not come down to start the fire, and the oldest boy, whose name was Tom, had gone up and found her gone, and the whole careful world she had built came apart in the space of an afternoon. Now they stood on the courthouse steps, and the rain came down, and a man none of them had ever seen tied his horse to the rail and walked up to meet them. "My name's Caleb Stroud," he said. "Tell me your names." The boy hesitated, the way you hesitate when you've been disappointed enough times to be careful. But something in the steadiness of the man made him answer, "I'm Tom. I'm 12. He nodded down the row. "That's Pearl. She's 11. Henry, we call him Hen. He's 9. Sadie's 8. Mabel's 7. The twins, Joseph and Jonah, they're 6. Lucy's 5. He bent and gathered up the smallest one, the girl from the puddle, settling her on his hip with the ease of long practice. "And this here is Rose. She's near 2. She doesn't talk much, but she understands everything. Miss Esther always said so." "Rose," Caleb said softly, and the baby regarded him with her great, dark, patient eyes. It was in that moment, standing in the rain looking at a 2-year-old who had already learned not to cry, that Caleb Stroud made a decision that would have seemed, to anyone watching, like the act of a madman. But he was not thinking like a sensible cattleman just then. He was thinking of a small grave under a cottonwood on the far side of his land, and a second grave beside it, and the long 10 years he had spent telling himself that a man could be content with cattle and quiet and the company of nobody at all. The courthouse door opened, and Mr. Pell came out. He was not a cruel man. Caleb saw that right away, and it mattered, because it would have been easier if he had been. Mr. Pell was a tired man with ink stains on his fingers and a ledger under his arm, and entirely too much to do, and he looked at the 9 children the way a man looks at a problem he has not been given the tools to solve. "Mr. Stroud, is it?" he said, glancing at the stranger. "If you've business with the county, it'll have to wait. I've got these children to settle before the coach leaves, and the Hendry place will only take the 2 boys, and the home down in Ashford has room for 3 more, and the rest—" He stopped and rubbed his eyes. "The rest I haven't sorted yet. How many places you splitting them between?" Caleb asked. 4, maybe 5. Mr. Pell said it without relish. "It isn't what I'd choose, but 9 children, Mr. Stroud. 9. There isn't a soul in 3 counties with room enough or means enough to take 9 children at once." And here is where Caleb Stroud might have nodded and stepped aside and ridden on to his half-finished barn and lived out the rest of his quiet life, never knowing what he had passed by. The whole story turned on the next thing he said, and afterward, not one of those children would ever forget it, not even Rose, who was too young to remember anything, but who would be told it so many times that it became a memory all the same. Caleb looked at the row of soaked and waiting children. Then he looked at Mr. Pell. "I've got room," he said. "I'll take all 9. They're mine now, forever." For a moment, nobody moved. The rain filled the silence. Pearl, the 11-year-old, made a small sound and pressed her hand against her mouth. Tom stood frozen with the baby on his hip, and his careful, grown-up face cracked straight down the middle, and underneath it was just a boy of 12 who had been carrying far too much for far too long. Mr. Pell stared. "Mr. Stroud, you can't simply— a man can't simply— do you understand what you're saying? 9 children. Have you a wife?" "No," Caleb said. "A house big enough?" "Not yet. I'll build it. And you'll feed them, clothe them, all 9, through every winter, with no woman in the house and no kin to help you." "I'll learn what I don't know," Caleb said. "I've got land, and cattle, and 2 hands that work, and these children have got each other, which is more than most folks ever manage, and I'm not going to be the man who takes that from them." He paused, and his voice dropped, and what came next, he did not say for Mr. Pell at all. "I had a family once, a wife and a little girl. I lost them both, 10 years back, to the fever, peaceful at the end, but gone all the same. And I told myself I was done, that a man only gets the one chance at it." He looked down the row of faces, "But I don't believe that's true anymore. I think a man gets as many chances as he's brave enough to take, and I'm done being a coward about it." It was the longest speech anyone in Larkspur Bend had ever heard Caleb Stroud make, and it was very likely the longest he would ever make again, but it was enough. Mr. Pell was quiet a long time. He was, as has been said, not a cruel man, and somewhere under the ledgers and the ink stains and the weariness, there was still a person who had taken this thankless job because he could not stand to see children sorted like livestock. He looked at the 9 of them, holding hands, watching this stranger with the first fragile light of hope any of them had allowed themselves in days, and he made a decision of his own. "It's irregular," he said slowly. "It's the most irregular thing I've ever done. There'll be papers. There'll be a judge wanting to know you're fit. I'll have to come out to your land and see it for myself, and if it's not what you say, Mr. Stroud, I'll take every one of them back. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Caleb said. "Come whenever you like. Bring the judge." But, and here Mr. Pell's tired face did something it had not done in a long while. It softened. "But I'll not split them up today. Not when there's a man standing in front of me, fool enough and good enough to want them all." He tucked the ledger under his arm. "Take them home, Mr. Stroud. We'll sort the rest in the morning." What happened next, none of them would ever be able to describe properly, because some things are too large for words. Pearl began to cry, and then Sadie, and then little Lucy, who did not entirely understand, but knew that the older ones were crying the good kind of tears. Tom set the baby down and turned away so the others would not see his face, and Caleb Stroud crossed the muddy steps and put one big hand on the boy's shaking shoulder and said, low, so only Tom could hear, "You can put it down now, son. Whatever you've been carrying, you can set it down. It's my turn to carry it a while." And Tom, who had been the man of 9 children for 3 terrible days, finally let himself be 12. The ride out to Caleb's land took the better part of 2 hours. The whole crowd of them piled into a borrowed wagon with Caleb's horse tied behind. And somewhere in that long, wet ride, a remarkable thing began to happen. The children began to talk, shyly at first, then all at once, the way a creek breaks up in spring. Hen wanted to know if there were horses. There were. Mabel wanted to know if she could have a job, a real one, because she was very good at jobs. She could. The twins wanted to know everything at the same time and at top volume, and Caleb answered every question he could and made up reasonable answers to the ones he couldn't. And by the time the wagon came over the last rise and his land spread out below them, grey and green and rain-washed and beautiful, even Tom was smiling. The house was small. That was the plain fact of it. Caleb's cabin had been built for one man who didn't expect company, and it had 2 rooms and a loft, and nowhere near enough of anything. But the children did not see a small house. They saw a fire, which Caleb built up high. They saw a roof that did not leak. They saw a man moving around the kitchen with the awkward determination of someone who has decided to learn how to feed 9 children and intends to begin immediately, even if his first attempt at supper was, by his own cheerful admission, not fit for the hogs. They ate it anyway, all of it, and they laughed, which Caleb suspected they had not done in some while, and the sound of it filled the small house all the way up to the rafters. That night, he gave the children his bed and the loft and every blanket he owned, and he sat up by the fire with the baby asleep against his chest, and he did not sleep at all, and he was not tired. He watched the rain finally ease off past the window. He listened to the breathing of 9 children in a house that had been silent for 10 years. And Caleb Stroud, who had told himself for a decade that he wanted nothing and needed no one, discovered that he had been lying the whole time. Word of it got around, the way word does. By week's end, half of Larkspur Bend had an opinion about the cattleman who'd taken in 9 orphans, and not all the opinions were kind. There were those who said he'd done it for the labor, to work the older ones like ranch hands. There were those who said it couldn't last, that he'd give them back by Christmas, that no single man could manage it. There were even a few who said worse, the way small minds will, until Mr. Pell himself stood up in the general store and told them plainly that he had been out to the Stroud place twice now, and the judge once, and that he had never in his career seen children better cared for, and that the next person to say otherwise could take it up with him directly. But the truth is that Caleb Stroud paid the gossip no mind at all, because he was busy. He was busy building. He hired 2 men with the last of his cattle money and put up a proper house before the first snow, 4 rooms and a great long table and a loft with windows, and the children helped, every one of them, carrying boards and holding nails and painting what they could reach. He was busy learning. He learned to braid Lucy's hair, badly at first and then less badly. He learned which of Sadie's stomachaches were real and which meant she was worried about something she didn't have words for. He learned that Pearl had a gift for figures and got her a slate, and that Hen could gentle a skittish horse better than grown men twice his size, and that the twins, troublesome as they were, would do anything in the world for each other and could be trusted with anything if you trusted them together. There was one evening that first winter he would carry with him always. The snow had come down heavy, and the new house was buttoned up tight and warm, and after supper, Pearl asked, shy about it, whether he knew any stories. Caleb confessed that he did not really, that he was a cattleman and not a storyteller. So instead, Tom got down the worn little book that had been Miss Esther's, the one they had carried out of the old house, wrapped in a shirt so it would not be lost, and he read to all of them by the fire, the way she used to. And Caleb sat in the big chair with the baby drowsing on his knee and listened to the boy's steady voice and watched the firelight move across 8 upturned faces, and he understood that he was not there to replace the good woman who had loved these children first. He was only carrying on what she had begun. Somewhere, he hoped, she could see that her children were warm and fed and together, and that her work had not been undone. He thought she would have liked that very much. And he was busy being, for the first time in 10 years, completely and exhaustingly happy. There was a woman, too, in time. Her name was Hannah Reyes, the schoolteacher in Larkspur Bend, 41 years old, a widow herself, with a kind face and an iron patience. And she had taken an interest in the Stroud children from the moment they appeared in her schoolroom, scrubbed and nervous, and clutching their new slates. It was not a sudden thing between her and Caleb. It was a slow thing, the way the best things are, built over months of her staying after lessons to help Pearl with her sums, and him finding excuses to be the one who came to fetch the children home. But there came an evening, near a year after that rainy day on the courthouse steps, when Hannah looked across the great long table at 9 children and 1 quiet cattleman, and Caleb looked back at her, and neither of them needed to say the thing out loud just yet, because they both already knew. That, however, is a story for another day. The day I want to tell you about is one that came later still, on a clear, bright morning when the papers finally came through. Mr. Pell rode out himself to bring them, and he stood in the yard of the big new house and read aloud, in his tired official voice that could not quite stay official, the words that made it true in the eyes of the law, that Caleb Stroud was, henceforth and forever, the lawful father of 9 children, by name, each one written out in his careful ink: Tom, Pearl, Henry, Sadie, Mabel, Joseph, Jonah, Lucy, and Rose. When he finished, there was a silence in the yard. And then little Rose, who was 3 now and talking up a storm and afraid of absolutely nothing, marched across the yard to where Caleb stood, and she tugged on his trouser leg until he bent down, and she put both her small hands on either side of his weathered face, the way she did when she had something important to say. "You're ours," she informed him, "forever." Caleb Stroud, 39 years old, a man who had once buried his whole heart under a cottonwood tree and walked away certain he would never love anything again, knelt down in the yard of the house he had built and gathered his daughter into his arms. And over the top of her head he looked at the rest of them, at Tom, who stood tall now and easy, at Pearl, with her slate and her quick, clever mind, at Hen and Sadie and Mabel, at the twins who had finally stopped being trouble and turned into the kind of young men a father is proud of, at little Lucy with her crooked braided hair, and he said the only thing there was to say. "And you're mine," he told them, "all of you, now and forever, just like I promised in the rain." Nobody in Larkspur Bend ever again said it couldn't last. They will tell you, those who knew the family in the years that came after, that the Stroud place was the warmest house in the whole county, that the long table was never short of company, that every one of those 9 children grew up straight and strong and good, and that they came back, all their lives, every Sunday they could manage, to the man who had stopped his horse in the rain when he had no earthly reason to. And if you had asked Caleb Stroud, in his old age, sitting on the porch of that big house with grandchildren tumbling in the yard, whether he ever regretted the day he looked at 9 soaked and unwanted children and said they're mine now, forever, he would have laughed at you. He would have looked out over his land and his family and the long good life he very nearly rode right past, and he would have told you the truest thing he knew, that the children nobody wanted had wanted him right back, and that was all the family any man could ever need.